Okay, so this is Aditya. Aditya SK works with animal ethics on raising concern about wild animal suffering and anti-speciesism. His work primarily focuses on promoting the field welfare biology among the academia in India. Aditya has background in animal protection law from the National Academy of Legal Studies and Research and has been actively involved with multiple animal advocacy organizations in India to raise concern about animal suffering. He is also the organizer for a Safe Movement chapter of Hyderabad and has regularly organized demonstrations and vigils to demand to promote veganism and moral consideration of non-human animals. So the full name of this workshop is Rethinking Wild Animal Advocacy, Expanding the Circle of Moral Consideration to Wild Animals Within Animal Advocacy. This talk will briefly introduce why the issue of wild animal suffering is important and how we can address this problem. Animals in the wild suffer due to a variety of harms that are both natural and anthropogenic. However, the welfare of individual wild animals are not considered within the conversations about how to improve animal welfare. This talk will delve into the considerations about how animal activists can help in making progress on this issue. Without further ado, please welcome Aditya.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction. It's really nice to see a diverse group of participants here. I'm really happy to present this session. A second, right. All right. Yeah, and as Sarah mentioned, I am one of the coordinators for animal ethics in India. The primary work I do is to spread concern about speciesism and also about why we need to morally consider wild animals, and while also doing outreach about welfare biology within the academia. The primary reason why I think animal activists need to be aware of the suffering of wild animals is because it is as important for rejecting speciesism as also for improving the welfare of farmed animals. So most animal activists stress the importance of sentience when demanding the protection of farmed animals. The main reason why sentience, like when we talk about moral consideration, what does moral consideration mean? It means how our choices, if it means considering how our choices affect the well-being of another being. So sentience is like the relevant baseline property when deciding which being deserves moral consideration. It doesn't matter if the being is a farmed animal, a wild animal, or maybe a captive animal, or possibly in the future it could also be like an artificial sentient entity. So this was basically to give you like a background on why I think ethically it's important for animal activists to also include the suffering of wild animals or the welfare of wild animals within the scope of the conversation that they have during animal advocacy. Now, the usual way in which we understand speciesism is as a discrimination against those who don't belong to a certain species, which in most cases are animals, who don't belong to human, like, Homo sapiens. But in other cases, it's also discrimination between two different species based on their aesthetics, their size, their scientific interest, or depending on the salience that they have with human beings. So if we expand the definition of speciesism to also include the suffering of wild animals, that is more consistent with our narrative of speciesism. Just because an animal is born in the wild doesn't mean that the suffering that animal endures is any less than the suffering of a farmed animal or a companion animal. So there is this assumption that we should not care about animals that are born in the wild or their well-being. We should let them be, and we should not help them when they're suffering just because they are born in the wild. But this also classifies as a form of speciesism, because for the same reason I mentioned earlier, which is that their suffering matters to them irrespective of if it is caused by humans or by nature. And when we reject this discrimination of speciesism, usually animal activists focus on when humans actively harm or exploit animals. But when we reject speciesism, it also implies that we should be in favor of helping them whenever it is possible. Just like if there is a human being in the wild, or if there's an animal that we cared about in the wilderness, and he or she or they are suffering from any cause which is either naturally caused or whether it is due to climate change or any other cause or disease, we would be in support of helping them. But if you look at the mainstream discourse around the attitudes towards helping animals in the wild, it is usually that of indifference or romanticization of their situation. Now, when I usually talk about helping animals in the wild, people are usually pessimistic. They feel that wilderness is very complicated, it is very sensitive, and we should not be interfering in the wild. However, humans have already been helping animals in the wild since a very long time in many different ways. I'll show you some different ways in which we have already been considering some wild animals and tried to assist them when they are undergoing suffering. For example, when animals are orphaned, when their parents die, there are many organizations and institutions that invest resources into caring for these orphaned animals and ensuring their nourishment until they are independent enough to live in the wilderness without any support. Similarly, even during natural disasters like during forest fires or floods, we've seen many cases, for example, in the case of Australian wildfires, where there was like a huge government support as well as individuals are going out of their way to rescue these animals that were affected by the forest fires and giving them water and taking them for treatment. It's not just terrestrial animals, even marine animals are given a lot of consideration in some cases. Like, for example, when whales get disoriented during the tides and they get stuck on the shore, or when dolphins uh, get injured due to fishing nets, or they get disoriented and come onto the shores. There are many organizations and volunteers that participate in rescue missions of these animals. They give them the necessary treatment and lead them back into the oceans. And also when animals are in general affected by any injuries or when they are affected by a disease, there are wildlife rehabilitation and rescue centers where these animals are rescued and given them care and support to be able to recover and be able to be left back into the forest or the wilderness. And it's not just on an individual scale. There have also been programs conducted on a larger scale. For example, feeding programs that happen during extreme weather conditions or during famine when there's not sufficient food available for the animals in a particular area. This is in Turkey where during the extreme cold there's not enough grass for the herbivores to sustain. So the organizations have like a large scale feeding program where animals did benefit out of this intervention. And another very dominant cause of suffering in the wild is diseases. But as we can see here, since 1980s, there has already been research on how we can vaccinate wild animals against rabies. While this research was mainly done to protect humans and domestic animals from these zoonotic diseases, and it was mainly done for anthropocentric reasons, animals did benefit from this vaccination and were protected against rabies. And due to this intervention, large parts of Northern America and Europe were free of rabies. If you're wondering how they did this, they would put the vaccine into these cookie baits and drop them from helicopters so that the animals would feed on them. And this did show effectiveness, and many other countries have started using similar methods to vaccinate animals against other diseases like anthrax or tuberculosis. So yeah, these were some ways in which humans have already been helping them. But I would like to show you why the amount of resources going into assisting wild animals from suffering is very less compared to the scale of suffering that's present in the wild. The next few slides include some images of animal suffering. So if you are sensitive to looking at animals in pain, the slides might be a little distressing, so you might want to reconsider viewing them. Animals, as Sarah mentioned in the description, animals suffer in the wild due to many, many reasons. And the scale of animals in the wild is much, much larger than we can imagine. It's an astronomical number. The number of farmed animals is approximately estimated to be 10 to the power 11. Farmed animals, like the terrestrial farmed animals. If we include also the farmed fish, the aquatic animals, it's estimated to be 10 to the power 13. But the approximations of the number of animals that exist in the wild is 10 to the power 19 sentient beings. And that is like a really, really huge number. It's somewhere around a billion, trillion. And so the scale is definitely huge there. And we usually have this assumption that animals in the wild are living this harmonious life, a very romanticized view of their lives in the wild, that there's some balance in nature, and most animals have a way of coping with all the negative experiences that they might undergo. But that's not really the case. There are many reasons why animals suffer in the wild. For example, during weather conditions or with injuries. For example, birds usually get affected during hailstorms or during extreme cold, or when they get injured, they usually don't have any means for recovery. They become prone to predation or diseases, and they usually die a slow and painful death. Similarly, even during extreme cold conditions, a lot of these lakes that get frozen, a lot of animals that live there, they also die due to freezing. And yeah, weather conditions are also like a really significant cause of suffering in the wild. Um, and also during famines, this we've also seen in India, in the western part of India, like every time when the summers are harsh, many animals die due to starvation, where they don't have access to food. They walk very long distances in search of food, and when they don't find food, they die very slowly of starvation, which is again very, very painful when the body starts consuming the fats of the body, and the animal becomes so weak that it cannot bear the pain and ends up dying either due to predation or very slow death. And also during floods, where animals get stranded, they lose access to food. Sometimes where they are stranded, there are other predators hiding there as well, and they become prone to predation or diseases, and they usually again suffer and die. Similarly, parasites are also a very common cause of death. This is a silver stretching spider, which is affected by this parasite, which wasps leave eggs within the spider, and the parasite basically consumes the host alive. So another reason to believe why suffering is more widespread in nature is because of the dominant reproductive strategy in the wild, where so many species of animals have a very high mortality, like juvenile mortality. So to increase the number of animals that survive to the next generation, the parents give birth to huge number of offsprings, out of which very few end up surviving. In this case, this is an example of olive ridley turtles, where they give birth to 100 to 200 eggs, up to 200 eggs sometimes, out of which one or two end up surviving. The rest of them usually die due to predation, diseases, parasites, and sometimes due to anthropogenic harms, where they get disoriented, come onto the roads, and are crushed by vehicles. So, yeah, and to look at a even more bad example is of bullfrogs, which give birth to 10,000 offsprings. Sometimes the water body in which they give birth dries up, and all the tadpoles, which may very well be sentient, they end up dying, all of them. And even if they do end up surviving, less than 1% of the 10,000 offspring survive till adulthood, and the rest of them end up dying. So these are just two examples, but majority of the species that exist in the wild reproduce in ways where they give birth to huge number of offsprings and they give them very less parental care. So majority of these animals that are born, they usually have a very short life, and the majority of experiences they have as well are filled with suffering and pain, and they end up dying very quickly after coming into existence. So the population dynamics within the wilderness is such that suffering prevails more than the positive experiences that animals have. This is opposed to the species which give birth to one or two offsprings and give them a lot of parental care, like humans, orangutans, gorillas, elephants, where the whole community or the herd of animals ensures that this baby that they've given birth to uh, survives till adulthood. Yeah, so these were some reasons that I covered briefly, which show why suffering might be very widespread in nature. So this might make people a little pessimistic about the complexity of this issue and if and what can animal activists do to help these animals when they are suffering. As I said, if we reject speciesism, then we should also grant moral consideration to the animals that are living in the wild that are suffering and dying in the wild, and we should be in favor of helping them. So, to this end, there are few organizations working on raising concern for wild animal suffering. We have, so be it any field, for example, animal welfare science or conservation biology or economics, whenever there was a lot of complexity involved, the first step was to gain more information and do more research about this issue. So when animal welfare was a very unknown topic to people, so they created this field of animal welfare science through the support of animal lovers. And by gaining more research from this field, we were able to come up with specific interventions on what methods can we implement to assess the welfare of these animals and also help them. So this field, which is welfare biology, looks at what are the factors affecting the well-being of animals, especially those that are living outside human control. Because within human control, within human influence, there is already animal welfare science that looks at welfare of animals in captivity, farmed animals. Also, veterinary science looks at these issues. So, welfare biology is primarily looking at wild animals or feral animals that are existing outside human control. But it could also include animals that are in some way still coexisting with humans, like pigeons or snakes that are called as urban wild animals. So, doing research within this field can give us a lot of information on how we can responsibly understand what the welfare of animals is like in the wild and how we can help them without causing negative flow through effects. And to this end, Animal Ethics, the organization I work with, conducted a survey among academics to understand what are the existing attitudes towards helping wild animals. Because the paradigm that currently exists is of conservationism or environmentalism, which looks at ecosystems or environment, but doesn't exactly look at the welfare of individual wild animals or the suffering of animals. So we were very interested and we wanted to examine the views that life scientists have towards different research areas. And the study was done among 337 participants, among both scholars as well as students, especially in the life sciences backgrounds, which is in animal sciences, biological sciences, and environmental sciences. And this was done across multiple continents to get some diversity of views. And what we found out was there were three major categories of intervention that was supported among the scholars, or the categories which people would be in support of researching to understand the welfare of wild animals. So the first one was vaccination, uh, mainly because we've seen how zoonotic diseases also spread into the human sphere as well as to the domestic animals. So while it affects wild animals, scholars had incentive to look at vaccination as a way of aiding them because it also affects other interests. And there was urban ecology, which, as I mentioned earlier, looks at how we can help urban wild animals, which are like pigeons, snakes, raccoons, or any animal that is not exactly domesticated, but coexists in either human settlements, like in the agricultural environments, or within the cities, like pigeons. Yeah. And the third, the category which they were interested was during weather events. As we've seen, almost all the environments have been directly or indirectly influenced by human-induced climate change. So most of the ecosystems that are currently there on the planet have been in one way or the other affected by this. So they were also more open to researching how weather events affect the welfare of wild animals and how we can help them. Yeah, and so one part of the solution is definitely more research and more information on how academic research can aid helping wild animals. But the second more important issue is how how animal organizations can make progress on this issue. As I said, with either with animal welfare science or with climate science, the main force of change came from animal activists. Um, 30 years ago, veganism was an unknown concept, but today it's a significant force across the world only because activists have been tirelessly spreading concern about animal rights and veganism. So similarly, if animal activists who already have experience changing public perception about attitudes towards animals include this issue within their narrative as well, then that would be a very effective way of having long-term change where we are considering the welfare of wild animals. So one of the ways in which animal organizations can help in making progress on this issue is through engaging in campaigns that the public supports. Um, it need not be something that is very controversial. There are many forms of intervention that are also supported for other reasons, for environmental reasons or for public health reasons. So by supporting campaigns where animal welfare is considered, it could create like a ripple down effect where animal welfare is given focus, even within the context of wild animals. Some examples of this is, for example, in Kaziranga National Park in India, where there are yearly floods. The environmentalists as well as the government were interested in building these artificial highlands so that animals can escape from the flood water. While this was mainly done to protect rhinos, because they are considered, like conservation, they are considered valuable from conservationist perspective. Other animals benefited from this as well. Similarly, for contraceptives for pigeons. Earlier, when there was overpopulation of pigeons, the governments would usually resort to killing them or hunting them. But now there have been some authorities that have been implementing more compassionate ways of controlling their population without harming them. There has been some pushback against contraceptives because some people believe that it is unnatural. But again, it is important to look at it from their welfare point of view. By giving too much weight to what is natural or unnatural, we risk being too anthropocentric. And it's much better to give them contraceptives than kill them when their population increases. So a few authorities, like in Barcelona as well as in Canada, in Oak Bay, they have implemented birth control for fawns, where there has been like demonstrated effectiveness of using birth control. So supporting these campaigns that are focused on balancing both the interests of humans as well as the interests of animals. By supporting them, we also highlight the importance of animal welfare within these interventions. The next way in which animal organizations can support uh, uh, creating awareness about wild animal suffering is by incorporating messaging that includes concern for wild animals within their material or on their website. To give you an example, at Animal Ethics, we have this leaflet where we talk about speciesism in general. But instead of focusing solely on exploitation or the direct exploitation that we do on farm animals, we also have a section in the second paragraph where we talk about how animals in the wild also experience a lot of hardships due to different factors. And it is also important to extend moral consideration to them and support rescues of animals in need. So,
Aditya,
yeah,
sorry. Do you think we could, sorry, we're gonna run a little bit over, if that's okay with everyone, but maybe we could go on to like some of the questions that some people have, some of the participants.
sure. I think that's fine with me. I think I'll be done with it in another 2 minutes. I could also take questions after that. If that's okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah, and the third way is by avoiding the confusion between or creating a distinction between helping wild animals versus conservation. There's a usual tendency to merge both these interests that actually have different goals. Conservationists focus on protecting ecosystem, biodiversity, or the diversity of species, as opposed to the animal activists who are focused more on the welfare or the well-being of wild animals. So it's helpful to create this distinction when we are raising awareness about wild animal welfare. Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about this issue, I would highly recommend to check out our website, which has like a much more in-depth information base for people to learn about wild animal suffering and the ethics of animal suffering. We also have a YouTube channel where we cover all these topics in depth in a visual medium. And we have also translated our website into many languages, and a few of them are also from Asian-based countries, or there's in Mandarin as well as Hindi. We're also publishing in Telugu. So if you're interested in also translating this information into your into the language spoken in your country, we welcome collaboration in this front. We also have an ebook that is looking at this issue in much more depth. If you're interested, it's available on our website in our blog section. Yep, that's pretty much it from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, everyone.